This is Taya Grimm and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Pocomoke City, Maryland. After a year-long Real News investigation into the firing of Pocomoke's first black police chief, Kelvin Sewell, amid allegations of racism and discrimination, the U.S. Department of Justice has stepped into the fray and joined the discrimination lawsuit against Pocomoke City, Worcester County, and the state of Maryland itself. The entry of the federal government's top law enforcement agency is both historic and groundbreaking for the small town on Maryland's lower eastern shore. Historic in that will bring all the resources of the federal government to bear against the city which fired its first black police chief without cause more than a year ago. Groundbreaking because it comes as Maryland State Prosecutor Emmett Davitt prepares to try Sewell on misconduct charges for his role in an accident investigation which occurred over 2 years ago. I'm here with Stephen Janis to discuss the implications of the Department of Justice joining this lawsuit and what it means for this controversy moving forward. Stephen, can you give us some background on what's happened here in Pocomoke and what it means if the Department of Justice joins this lawsuit?
Well, a year and a half ago, we came down here to cover the firing of Chief Kelvin Sewell. He was Pocomoke's first black police chief, a former homicide detective who moved down from Baltimore City and implemented a form of community policing which was incredibly popular. Crime was reduced, and he was mysteriously fired. It came out later that he was fired for what he claims was that he had the leadership in town asked him to fire 2 black police officers who had filed a discrimination complaint against the Worcester County Task Force. From there, the story just evolved into something even larger than just the firing of an African-American police chief. We covered the community coming into political consciousness and demanding to be heard and demanding to have Sewell rehired. And from that came a lawsuit where Sewell filed a discrimination lawsuit against the city, claiming that he was fired based on racial motivation, based on racial discrimination, based on retaliation for not firing these 2 officers. And that has been the story thus far. The EOC agreed. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission said, yes, indeed, he was. But then State Prosecutor Emmett Davitt indicted Sewell on 2 counts of misconduct. So the controversy has just continued with both sides sort of entrenched. Now the Justice Department coming in is totally different. You have to think of Pocomoke in names like Ferguson. Ferguson, Missouri was a place that the Justice Department intervened and sued, and now Pocomoke City. And the Justice Department joining the lawsuit means to be the full weight of the federal government, as you said, behind the lawsuit that Sewell has, suing not just Pocomoke City, but Worcester County, the Worcester County State's Attorney's Office, the Worcester County Sheriff's Department, and the State Attorney General, who is representing the Maryland State Police in this lawsuit. So it is a momentous, landmark decision.
The conflict began when one of Sewell's officers, Detective Frank Savage, filed a discrimination complaint against the Worcester County Drug Task Force. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, very specifically, he said that he was working in a racially hostile atmosphere where they would regularly use the N-word, where they took him to Ku Klux Klan Way, where they put a dead deer, bloody deer tail on his car, where they put an Obama food stamp. It was basically a very hostile environment. And this is very key because this Worcester County, he was the first African-American officer on this Worcester County Task Force. And they were regularly going into Pocomoke and doing drug raids in an African-American neighborhood. So this became a point of contention. He filed an EOC complaint, and it was sustained. And it was after the hearing, the mediation hearing between him with Lieutenant Green, who is another African-American officer, and the Worcester County people who had been accused, that the demands began for Sewell to fire both the officers.
Since Sewell has filed this discrimination lawsuit, what's actually in the suit?
Well, the suit recounts constant harassment by city officials for Sewell to fire Detective Savage and Lieutenant Green, that this was an ongoing pattern and practice. It also talks about things that seem at their face discriminatory, that Sewell never got a raise, and that none of the African-American officers got raised, that Sewell was told to deny African-American officers promotions and overtime, that white officers did get raises, that the previous chief before him was white got raises, that Sewell never got a contract, but the previous chief got a contract, that he was excluded from meetings. So it was sort of, and that the fact that the Worcester County State's Attorney also discriminated against Detective Savage and made him feel uncomfortable and read the N-word during a meeting on a case where he read the N-word like 7 or 8 times. A letter from a so-called suspect. So it really created a pattern and practice in Worcester County on the Lower Eastern Shore where, first there was charges of racial discrimination and then retaliation. So it's a pretty comprehensive indictment of the county and even the state's handling of African-American police officers.
In the meantime, State Prosecutor Emmett Davitt has filed charges against Kelvin Sewell. What are those charges about?
Well, the charges stem from a 2014 car accident where a gentleman, a resident of Pocomoke, ran into 2 cars, sideswiped them, and called police. And it was only property damage, and Sewell and other officers responded. And so according to Emmett Davitt, somehow Sewell and Lieutenant Green interfere with the investigation. I think they're alleging that the person who created the accident was actually intoxicated. But of course, it's very difficult to say. This was 2 years ago.
Weren't there other officers on the scene?
There were other officers on the scene. From what we're hearing, we haven't been able to report this yet, but there was a 911 call made where the officer said this person was not drunk, but nevertheless, he was in his house. So he was home. So there wasn't really much Sewell can do based upon the law. But the thing is that for whatever, we have not seen all the evidence, Emmett Davitt seems to believe that Sewell and Green somehow violated their oath as police officers. Of course, this was a very minor accident. There was no one was hurt. It was just some cars sideswiped. It's 2 years after. And I think one of the things that Sewell's attorneys have been talking about is the fact that this investigation was started after Sewell's lawsuit, or kind of contemporaneous with Sewell's lawsuit. So it raises a lot of questions about it, and his attorneys have filed motions to dismiss based on governmental misconduct. We don't know what it is, but we'll probably find out tomorrow.
Now, the Maryland FOP has actually shown a lot of support for officers that have been charged. For example, the 6 officers charged with the in-custody death of Freddie Gray, and the FOP has stood behind them 100%. Has the FOP supported Kelvin Sewell or Lieutenant Savage in this case?
No, not at all. We have reached out to the state FOP continually, to Vince Canales, who is the president of the Maryland FOP, and he has not responded. They have not shown any support. Protesters in Baltimore also protested and demanded that the FOP stick up for these officers, for Sewell and Green, and they too have not. So there has been absolutely no support. And I think it's a very interesting contrast that in the case of Freddie Gray, where a man died, the FOP was firmly behind the officers.
My last question is, how is this conflict affecting the town?
Well, it's interesting because 2 weeks ago we came down because there's been an uptick in crime. There has been problems with juveniles on the street. There was a bank robbery, a brazen bank robbery. There was a murder at the Duck Inn. The people in the community who supported Sewell say, look what's happened. All this controversy, we've lost a very effective police chief. We have lost someone who was really involved in the community. He was out in the streets, people knew him, people miss the engagement. The new police chief, people say they don't see him as much. And now there's conflict between police and youth. We talked last week to some teens 2 weeks ago who were getting, said the police become more hostile. They miss having this sort of community policing. They miss sort of the connection to leadership. And I think it's affected the town tremendously. And I think it's affected the psychology of the town. And I think it's one of the reasons the Citizens for a Better Pocomoke, which is a community organization, is going to continue to fight for change. So it has changed this town drastically.
This is Tara Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Pocomoke City, Maryland.